This is the first time working with sapele, and I have to say that I really love the wood. Some of the interlocking grain makes for some issues with the planing direction, but in reality, those concerns are minor. I would really recommend giving this species a try if you haven't worked with it before. This beautiful grain pattern is very nice, and I'm really happy with how this design turned out. From the initial raw board to the marking out of the individual pieces via the cardboard cutouts, this project has been a pleasure to create. From the last episode, we had finished with the tripod-style base, and the next step is to create the top. After cutting the top to its final proportions, I went to the router table with a round nose bit. I measured in from the outside edge, as well as a start and stopping point, so I could put a groove all the way around as an outside border. Once the border has been defined, I can take a flat cutting bit and plunge it to the precise depth of the round nose bit. I put a piece of 1/4-inch plywood on the base of the router so it would traverse the space without falling off into the middle and gouge the work. Now it's a matter of using a couple of scrapers to even out the bottom. It takes a fair amount of hand scraping and sanding to get everything cleaned up to a close to finished state. I can use a flat scraper at an angle to almost slice the grain on the bias. It makes for a cleaner cut without having tear out. It's almost impossible to keep doing that without getting a screech that gives you the shivers. A small bent gouge is the perfect tool here to clean up the corners at the proper radius. The appropriate outside radius is done afterwards on the disc sander. With the inside surface finished at a reasonable level at this point, we can move to an additional detail for the top. I'm using another piece from the client's home as inspiration. This detail is a taper from the center of the top down towards the ends. I used the table saw set at the appropriate height to slice a bit from each end for the purpose. The top is now in its mostly completed shape. We need the final piece to be designed, cut, shaped, fitted, and glued. Getting a center line and establishing the depth and length of the piece to support the top is the first priority. A bit of hand planing will smooth the top edge and give us a reference point where the rest of the piece will be placed. My camera angle here is poor, and I apologize. What I am doing is cutting out the main waist area that will directly lie under the top to support it. Now that the main waist is gone, I can cut the rear profile where the top will seat. The small radius on the top and bottom edges of the top piece are shaped using a chainsaw file of the appropriate diameter. Files and rasps are a very good way to fine-tune detail work like this. The final shape of the top support can be traced and cut on the bandsaw. The appropriate angle can be cut on the back end so that it mates up with the main shaft of the piece. I have to create the final floating tenon for this piece. Again, I will use the Forstner bit on a scribed center line to give me the main cavity for the mortise, or hole, that the tenon, or the domino or biscuit, will sit in. The advantage to this method is since it's all custom, it can be fine-tuned to your exact specifications and fit. The extra gluing surface area, provided by the mortise and tenon joint, will provide tremendous strength just in case the client hits his elbow on the piece when he isn't paying attention. Since the angle of this gluing job is at weird angles, I have created a bit of a jig to help clamp the joint at the proper angle and give it the necessary pressure to squeeze the joint as the 5-minute epoxy dries. On to the most exciting part of a project, final shaping and sanding. Woohoo! Let's get excited! As I sand, rasp, and chisel my way to a smooth and finished product, I start to see the end result and tend to rush through these most important steps. I get bored of the mundane, but I have heard it said that a woodworking project should be equal parts designing, building, and finishing, which would include the sanding portion. I plan on using a couple of threaded inserts in the top, with two of the brass machine screws running through the support. This will allow for seasonal movement, since the grain runs perpendicular to the top. It is a small piece, and I don't know that I would absolutely need to have that preparation, but I think it fits with the mid-century period, as well as provide a certain amount of precaution. Well, I forgot that I would need to run a Forstner bit from the underside of my support, so I had to get inventive in my method for giving the brass machine screws an inset to hide the head of the screw. A repeat of using threaded inserts for the leading edge will provide the drink stand with levelers on uneven surfaces, as well as provide some protection from scratching or damaging the floor. I just cut the head off a couple of screws and then use red thread locker to tighten a nylon acorn nut on the end. Final sanding. Yay! I run through the usual grit progression to get a nice finished surface. My final sanding is with 320 grit. For my finish, I will be using 100% tung oil. This has a thick viscosity and takes about 2 weeks to cure. I ended up doing a second coat a day after doing my first coat, just to make sure I get full coverage.